My name is Nathan, and last week, I didn't just skip my son's first birthday party. I vanished. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because the people closest to me made one thing painfully clear: I was no longer considered family. They threw a party, didn't invite me, and told me to understand. So I booked a flight, packed a bag, and left everything behind. What happened next wasn't revenge, it was revelation. And while they were lighting candles without me, I was lighting a fire of my own, one that would change everything. Let me tell you what really happened. I was standing in the kitchen, half awake, staring at a pot of coffee I'd just brewed. The steam curled upward, dancing into the morning air like everything was normal. Like my life hadn't just been split in half by one blinking notification on my phone. The screen lit up. It was Julia, my wife. Or legally, still my wife. We were separated, not divorced. Caught in that awful gray zone where everything's technically intact, but emotionally obliterated. Hey, just a heads up. Mom's throwing a little thing for Noah's birthday Saturday. We kept it tight. Just family. Hope you understand. I read it once. Then again. My brain refused to catch up with my eyes. My heart stopped. My vision tunneled. Just family? Noah is my son. My little boy. The one I rocked to sleep when he couldn't stop crying at 2 a.m. The one whose diaper I changed half asleep while Julia snored through it all. The one I held the moment he came into this world, sobbing like it was the first sound I'd ever heard. His first birthday, and I wasn't invited. I gripped the counter with both hands as my chest tightened. Not in the metaphorical sense. Literally, like someone had reached in and squeezed my heart. I could feel the blood draining from my face. My hands started trembling. I stared at the message as the sting of betrayal settled deep into my bones. There was no chance I could let that message go unanswered. I picked up the phone and hit call, my fingers cold and stiff. Julia answered after 2 rings. Her voice was light, airy, like she was chatting about the weather. Hey, what's up? I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice, but it came out cracked, raw. You're really not inviting me to Noah's birthday? She sighed. I could hear the irritation building already, like I was the one ruining the mood. Nathan, it's just a birthday. Don't make it a thing. I clenched my jaw so tight it felt like my teeth might snap. I stared at the Lego tower Noah built the last time he was over. It was still on the coffee table, half finished, just like everything else he left behind. This isn't a casual dinner party or a girls' brunch, Julia. It's Noah's first birthday. I've been thinking about this for months. Silence. I imagined the cake, his little face lighting up when we sang to him, picking him up afterward, telling him he's the best thing I've ever done. And now you're telling me I'm not welcome? I was trying to keep my tone calm, but I could feel the storm boiling underneath. Another sigh. That huff she always did when she was annoyed. It's Mom's thing, she said. She wanted to keep it small. You'll see him another day. Another day. Like I was a divorced uncle they let visit out of pity. Not his father. Not the man who made the bottles, packed the diaper bag, kissed every bruise better. I hung up. My pulse was thundering in my ears. Before I could stop myself, I called Margaret, Julia's mom. She picked up with that sugary tone that always sounded like it was dipped in poison. Nathan, hi. Everything okay? I didn't waste time. Why am I not invited to Noah's birthday? She didn't even pause. Like she'd rehearsed the line. It's more of a maternal side event. Nothing personal. We're just keeping it simple. Nothing personal. That broke me. I laughed, but it wasn't joy. It was bitter, ragged. Like air escaping from a tire that had run over 100 nails. Nothing personal? I said through clenched teeth. He's my son. And you're boxing me out like I'm some old high school friend who sends a Christmas card once a year. Her voice turned sharper, colder. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Nathan. It's one day. I hung up before I said something that would burn every last bridge. I stood in the center of my living room, staring blankly at the Lego bricks scattered across the coffee table. The blue one Noah always tried to chew on was lying sideways. His giggle still echoed in my ears, his tiny voice calling me duh every time I walked in. And they were erasing me. Like I was optional. I felt something snap. Not just break, snap. Sharp, clean, final. Fine. If they didn't want me there. If I wasn't just family enough for a seat at the table, then I'd be nowhere to be found at all. I wouldn't beg for crumbs from the family that should have included me without question. I picked up my phone again. But this time, I wasn't calling anyone. I opened the browser. I searched for flights, cabins, getaways, anything that would pull me away from this bitter circus. Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Snow. Silence. A private cabin. Somewhere they couldn't reach me. Somewhere I didn't have to explain why I mattered. I hovered over the confirm button for a second, then slammed it like it was a trigger. I didn't know what I'd find out there, but I knew what I was leaving behind. And for once, that felt like the right kind of pain. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I tried. God knows I tried. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that text again. Just family. Like I wasn't part of that equation. Like my existence in Noah's life was conditional, optional, disposable. The house was dead silent. Too silent. Every creak of the floor, every tick of the clock felt louder than usual. I ended up on the couch, my phone in one hand, a cold beer in the other, scrolling through old photos of Noah. His newborn face, still red and wrinkled, his tiny hand curled into a fist as Julia slept in the background. I'd taken that shot, bleary-eyed and amazed, because I couldn't believe he was mine. There were more. Him in his high chair, me reading to him with his head nestled under my chin, us at the park laughing as I pushed him in the baby swing. Every image twisted the knife. And the worst part? They were planning to celebrate his biggest milestone without me, like none of that mattered. The beer tasted bitter. Or maybe it was just me. I set the bottle down, rubbing the weariness from my face, but the weight in my chest stayed right where it was. Julia's text. Margaret's condescending tone. The way they talked down to me like I was unreasonable for wanting to be at my own son's birthday. I wasn't going to sit here and take it. I wasn't going to let them erase me from Noah's life, one small non-invite at a time. I opened the travel app again. I wasn't calling anyone. I was done explaining myself. I started scrolling through places, tapping quickly, almost desperately, like I could outrun the ache building in my chest. Resorts, cabins, flights. The screen glowed in the dark room, lighting up my face with every new search. Then I saw it. Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Snow-covered peaks, pine forests, cabins tucked away in quiet valleys. The kind of place where no one would know me or expect anything from me. No fake smiles, no judgmental looks, just peace. I could see myself there, standing alone in the cold, the air sharp and honest, not thick with resentment. I tapped through the details, heart racing, but not from anger this time. A private cabin, a ski pass, first-class ticket. It was all right there. I didn't care about the cost. I wanted out. I booked everything in one go, like I was saving my own life. The next morning, I woke up with a stiff neck from the couch, but something felt different. Lighter. Like I'd crossed a line I couldn't come back from, and I was fine with that. I called Jude, my boss, before I could second-guess myself. He answered with a grunt, clearly still half asleep. Nathan, you okay? No sugarcoating it, I said. I need some time off. Starting tomorrow. I'm heading out of town. He paused, and I braced myself for a lecture, but then he just chuckled. You deserve the space. Take it. We'll manage without you for a bit. I exhaled, not realizing I'd been holding my breath. Thanks, Jude. I owe you. No, you don't. Just don't freeze your ass off wherever you're going. I laughed quietly and hung up. It was the first laugh I'd managed in days. Suddenly, the house didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a launch pad. I stood up, stretched, and walked into the kitchen. The coffee pot was still half full from the night before, but I made a fresh one. The scent filled the room as I leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the backyard. Just grass and a few trees. Nothing special. But in my head, I saw snow-covered hills, tall pines, a sky so wide it swallowed the noise whole. I took a sip, the heat burning my tongue, and it felt good. Real. I wasn't calling Julia again. I wasn't calling Margaret. I wasn't going to argue or plead for a spot at their table. They made their choice. Now I was making mine. They could have their cake and their cheap decorations and their smug little smiles. I'd make my own plans. I poured another cup, this time without hesitation, and set the mug down harder than I meant to. It clinked against the counter. My eyes drifted back to my phone, still sitting where I'd left it after the call with Jude. The stupid text still glowed on the screen. Hope you understand. No, I didn't understand. And I wasn't going to pretend I did. I opened my camera roll, took a screenshot of my flight confirmation, and posted it to my dusty social media account with a single caption. If I'm not invited, I'm unavailable. The notification ding felt like a door slamming shut. Final. Sharp. Necessary. I didn't wait for the likes. I didn't care who saw it. I just knew one thing. They wanted their tidy little gathering without me. Fine. Let them have it. I'd be somewhere they couldn't reach. Somewhere I mattered. And for the first time in a long time, I was okay with being gone. The morning I left, the sun hadn't even come up yet. The street outside my house was dark and quiet, but inside, everything felt like it was pulsing with finality. I'd packed the night before, deliberate, controlled, sweaters folded with precision, socks tucked into corners of the duffel like I was laying bricks in a wall between me and them. That old bag, a little scuffed and frayed at the seams, sat by the door like a silent promise. This time, I wasn't looking back. As I waited for the shuttle, I poured one last cup of coffee. The smell filled the kitchen, mingling with the cool air sneaking through the windows. I didn't bother turning on any lights. I didn't need the brightness. The only thing I needed was distance. From Julia's excuses, from Margaret's smug little rules, from the hollow ache in my chest that had been burning ever since they decided my presence at Noah's birthday wasn't necessary. The shuttle arrived right on time, headlights cutting through the early morning haze. I slung the duffel over my shoulder, heavy but grounding, and stepped outside. The cold bit at my face, sharp and clean, exactly what I needed. I didn't turn around to look at the house. I already knew what I'd see. The Lego tower still on the coffee table, the couch where I'd spent the last few nights twisting in anxiety, the photos on the wall that now felt like strangers. Carl, the shuttle driver, greeted me with a nod. Jackson Hole, huh? Good choice this time of year. I grunted something polite and climbed into the back seat. He didn't push for conversation, and I appreciated that. The drive to the airport was quiet. No music, no forced small talk, just the hum of the engine and the slow realization that I was really doing it. I was leaving. At the airport, I moved like a ghost through security and toward my gate. I kept my hood up, my eyes down. No one there knew who I was, and that anonymity felt like a gift. I sat by the window, watching planes taxi across the wet tarmac as the sky slowly shifted from black to gray. My phone buzzed. I almost didn't check it, but habit's a hard thing to break. It was Julia. You sure you don't want to come? It's no big deal. No big deal. The words scraped across my brain like sandpaper. Even now, even after the damage had been done, she still didn't get it. She still thought I was being dramatic, that I was overreacting for wanting to be a father. I didn't reply. More texts came in, a flood of guilt dressed up as concern. Margaret, don't make this about you. Vanessa chimed in, of course. Eli won't remember. What's the big deal? I let out a breath, sharp, joyless, and locked my phone. They didn't understand. None of them did. This wasn't about whether Noah would remember. This was about what it meant to be a father. This was about the message they were sending, that I could be cut out so easily, so casually, like I was some piece of furniture they didn't need that day. The boarding call came, and I stood up without hesitation. First class wasn't something I normally splurged on, but this time I needed it. I needed the comfort, the space, the separation. On the plane, I sat by the window and watched the world shrink beneath me. As the wheels lifted off the ground, I felt a weight loosen from my shoulders. For the first time in days, I didn't feel like I was suffocating. The flight was smooth, quiet. I didn't even turn on the in-flight movie. I just sat there, headphones in, eyes closed, the buzz of the engine lulling me into something like calm. Landing in Jackson Hole was like stepping into a postcard. Snow-covered peaks stretched endlessly, wrapped in a soft mist. The cold hit me the second I stepped off the plane, sharp, bracing, pure. Carl was there again, a scruffy older guy who looked like he'd lived through 1,000 winters and loved everyone. First time here, he asked as we drove toward the lodge. Yeah, I said, staring out the window at the snow-dusted trees. Needed a change. He chuckled. You picked the right place. Mountains have a way of clearing the junk out of your head. I didn't say anything back, but he wasn't wrong. We climbed into higher elevations, the road winding between pine-covered hills. The town gave way to wilderness, and eventually, my cabin came into view. Dark wood, wide windows, smoke curling from the chimney like a welcome. Carl helped me with my bag and gave a wave. Enjoy the solitude. Holler if you need a ride back. I stepped inside, and for a moment, I just stood there. A fire was already crackling in the hearth. Blankets were thrown over a leather couch. Beyond the windows, nothing but trees, snow, and silence. It was perfect. I set my bag down and walked to the window, pressing a hand against the cold glass. I could feel the quiet pressing in from all sides. not in a suffocating way, but in a peaceful one. No buzzing phone. No icy voices telling me I was overreacting. Just me in this place. I pulled out my phone, took a quick photo of the fire behind me, and posted it without a caption. I didn't need to say anything. The silence spoke for itself. I cracked open a beer, sank into the couch, and stared into the flames. While they were back home, stringing up balloons and forcing smiles, I was here, letting the fire burn away every last trace of their rejection. And for the first time since that message, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. The next morning, I woke up to silence so thick it almost had weight. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and sunlight filtered through the tall cabin windows, painting lines across the hardwood floor. For a moment, I just lay there on the couch, staring at the ceiling beams, wrapped in the warmth of the flannel blanket and the coldness of everything I'd left behind. It was Saturday, Noah's birthday. Back home, they were probably blowing up balloons, setting out snacks, arranging some overpriced cake with animals on top, and his name spelled out in bright, childish frosting. And I wasn't invited. That thought should have crushed me. But instead, it just floated through my head and then drifted away like smoke. I'd made my choice. I wasn't there to be the invisible father in the background while Julia's mother played queen of the day. I wasn't going to nod through another insult masked as a family decision. I got up slowly, my body still stiff from travel and all the emotional weight I'd carried. I made a cup of coffee in the tiny cabin kitchen, leaned against the counter, and looked out at the snow. The mountains stood tall and untouched, the trees motionless in the morning chill. It was beautiful here, still honest. Nothing fake. No expectations. Then my phone buzzed. I almost didn't check it. But I did. I'm still human. A flood of messages, all lighting up my screen like warning lights on a dashboard. Julia first. You sure you don't want to come? It's no big deal. No big deal. Still minimizing, still pretending this wasn't an ambush dressed up as a birthday party. Then Margaret chimed in. Don't make this about you. There it was, the guilt, the gaslighting, wrapped up in one condescending sentence. I could practically hear her voice in my head, sharp, judgmental, acting like I'd walked away from some grand responsibility, when really they had pushed me out from the start. Then came Vanessa, Julia's sister. Hope you're not serious. Noah won't remember this. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the pattern was so damn predictable. They thought this was about the kid remembering some party. They didn't get it. This wasn't about memory. This was about meaning. About presence. About being a father, not a footnote. I dropped the phone onto the couch and stared at the fire, now little more than embers. Part of me wanted to fire back, to unleash every thought burning through me like wildfire. I wanted to scream at them. You don't get to exclude me and then scold me for not showing up. You don't get to call it just a birthday when you didn't give me a choice. But I didn't type any of that. Instead, I opened my photos, pulled up the picture I'd taken of my plane ticket the night before, and stared at it. First class to Jackson Hole. Departure already behind me. That was my answer. Not words. Not arguments. Action. I clicked over to my social media app, barely used these days, and posted the photo. If I'm not invited, I'm unavailable. I hit send before I could overthink it. The little ding of the post going live felt like a slammed door echoing through an empty house. I didn't care who saw it. Let them talk. Let them screenshot it, share it in their group chats, whisper about how dramatic I was being. Let them. Because I wasn't sitting around waiting for a seat at their damn table anymore. A few notifications popped up. Likes. Comments. Some shocked emojis from old friends I hadn't heard from in months. I ignored them. Tossed the phone aside like it was burning my hand. The fire crackled weakly behind me as I stood and walked to the window. The snow was thicker now, soft flakes drifting down like the world was covering itself in a clean slate. For a moment, I just stood there, sipping my coffee, breathing deep. It was peaceful here, and that peace was something they couldn't touch. Out there, they were probably snapping pictures, posting stories, lighting candles on a cake I wasn't allowed to see. Julia would be smiling. Margaret directing everything like she was choreographing a play. Noah probably overstimulated, overwhelmed, crying while someone tried to calm him down. And I wasn't there. That truth pressed on me, heavy and cold. Not guilt, exactly, just grief. I missed my son, but I didn't miss them. Not the way they used me when it was convenient and discarded me when it wasn't. I sat back down, grabbed the blanket, and wrapped it around my shoulders. The phone buzzed again, probably more of the same noise. I didn't check. Instead, I stared into the embers and let them burn. This wasn't about running away. It was about refusing to be erased. They had their party. They had their maternal side of it. They had their cake, their forced smiles, their carefully curated Instagram stories. And I had this. The fire, the quiet, the freedom. It was more than enough. The cabin was silent, but my thoughts weren't. Even as I wrapped the blanket tighter around me, trying to focus on the fire and the mountains outside the window, my mind kept circling back to Noah. I wondered if he'd cried when the candles were lit, if he smiled when someone clapped, if he looked around for me and didn't understand why I wasn't there. That thought cut deeper than I expected. I hadn't heard anything since that flood of messages earlier. No more guilt trips. No more fake concern. And for a moment, I allowed myself to believe they'd finally left me alone. But then my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Rachel, my cousin, my only ally in that whole mess. Her name on the screen made my heart skip, not out of fear, but relief. I answered immediately. "Cal," she said, her voice already thick with disbelief. "Oh my God. Where do I even start? You dodged a train wreck." I stood up, gripping the phone tighter. "What happened?" She laughed, but it was one of those half-shocked, half-exhausted laughs. "It started off fine, I guess. Balloons, cake, Noah in one of those tiny paper hats. Then Margaret made a toast. You know, the usual." But she couldn't resist. She said something about some men not being able to show up for their children. The whole room went quiet. My jaw clenched. I could already picture her smug face, holding her wine glass like a weapon. Of course she did. "Oh, it gets better," Rachel said, clearly winding up now. So then, Brandon walks in. I blinked. Brandon? My buddy from work. Yup. And guess who he brought with him? Tara, Julia's old roommate. The one she despises. I sat down slowly, stunned. "You're joking." "Wish I was." Julia went pale, then bright red. Vanessa started yelling at Brandon like he planned it on purpose. Margaret tried to calm things down, but someone bumped the cake table while grabbing Noah, and it went flying. Chocolate frosting everywhere. Julia screamed, like full-on horror movie scream. I couldn't stop the laugh that burst out of me. A sharp, bitter, genuine laugh. "You've got to be kidding me." Nope. People started grabbing their coats and leaving before the sun even went down. Total chaos. Noah was crying. Julia was shaking. Vanessa stormed out. And Margaret was stuck with a ruined party and frosting on her shoes. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling of the cabin, the firelight flickering across the rafters. My son's birthday, the day they claimed I didn't need to be at, had turned into a circus. And the best part? I wasn't even there to witness it. "I picked the right weekend to disappear," I muttered. Rachel snorted. "You really did. They're all turning on each other now. Margaret's mad at Julia, Julia's blaming Vanessa, and somehow, get this, they're still blaming you for not being there to keep the peace." Of course they were. That was always the role they cast me in. The calm one. The fixer. The man who swallows his pain to keep the room from collapsing. And the one time I refused to play along, the whole thing exploded. I stood up and poked at the fire with the iron rod, watching sparks shoot upward. They can spin it however they want. I'm not there to hear it. Rachel's voice softened. "Good. Seriously, Cal, this trip? Best decision you've made in a long time." "Yeah," I said quietly. "It really is." We hung up, and I stood there for a long while, letting the crackle of the flames fill the space where her voice had been. I thought about the party collapsing, like a script they rehearsed without me, only to find that I'd been the glue holding it together all along. And I'd finally stepped away. I imagined Julia's face when she saw Brandon and Tara walk in. Margaret's failed attempt to hold the spotlight. The frosting hitting the floor like a symbol of everything they tried to control and lost. It was like a movie I didn't need to finish watching. I already knew the ending. I didn't feel guilty. Not anymore. I felt satisfied. Not because I wanted things to go wrong, but because they had to learn what it felt like when the person they took for granted stopped showing up. My phone lit up again. I expected more fallout, another passive-aggressive swipe disguised as concern. But it was just Rachel again. "FYI, Margaret told Grandma you cursed the party. She said it was bad blood. Grandma didn't buy it." I smirked. Of course she didn't. Grandma Esther was no fool. She'd seen right through Margaret's drama since the beginning. She was the only one who ever called out the nonsense and didn't care who got offended. I could practically hear her dry voice now. Bad blood? No, Margaret. Just bad choices. I didn't reply to Rachel. Just let the message sit there while I grabbed another beer from the fridge and settled back on the couch. The fire popped again. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Steady, quiet, indifferent to the noise of the world I'd left behind. They had their party. They had their chaos. And I had this. Peace earned through pain, quiet reclaimed by walking away. I wasn't part of their game anymore. And I didn't miss the table they set without me. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee brewing and a silence so complete it felt sacred. The snow outside had blanketed the world overnight, muting everything beyond the cabin walls. For the first time in a long while, I hadn't dreamed about Julia or Margaret or that cursed birthday party. I just slept. Deep, undisturbed sleep. I rolled off the couch slowly, joints stiff, head clear. My phone was exactly where I'd left it, face down on the armrest, mercifully silent. No buzzing. No messages. Just stillness. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood at the window, watching flakes drift down lazily over the treetops. It was peaceful, but not empty. It was mine. Not a space I had to earn. Not a moment I had to justify. Just a clean, quiet breath. I should have known it wouldn't last. The phone buzzed again. At first, I ignored it. I even took a few sips of coffee, let the warmth settle into my chest, but then curiosity dragged my hand toward it. 3 messages. Julia, this wouldn't have happened if you'd just come. Margaret, you left us to deal with this mess. Vanessa, you made Noah's birthday about you. Each one hit like a slap. Cold. Calculated. Perfectly timed to shift the blame from their own dysfunction back onto me. Like I'd abandoned them. Like I'd chosen to watch the world burn while they screamed for help. My jaw clenched, the mug shaking slightly in my hand. I set it down, not trusting myself not to throw it. I stared at those messages, that familiar twisting in my stomach starting to rise. The same feeling I used to get when Julia would pick a fight out of nowhere. When Margaret would shame me for being too passive. When Vanessa would chime in with her little jabs that stung long after the conversation ended. They were playing the same game they'd always played. Gaslight. Guilt. Twist the knife. Then ask why you're bleeding. But not this time. I wasn't going to explain myself. I wasn't going to justify why I didn't show up to a party I was never invited to in the first place. They shut the door. I just walked away. The phone buzzed again, and I nearly flinched. But this time, the name lit up something else in me. Rachel. Margaret told Grandma you cursed the party. Said it was bad blood. Grandma's not buying it, though. A real laugh escaped me. Not bitter. Not hollow. A genuine, chest-shaking laugh. I could already imagine Grandma Esther's reaction, rolling her eyes behind those thick glasses, cutting through the theatrics with that razor-sharp tone she reserved for moments just like this. Bad blood, she'd say. Please. Margaret's been spilling drama like wine at a wedding for years. That mental image lifted something in me. A weight. I exhaled slowly and stared down at my phone. Not with dread this time, but with resolve. I opened my contact list. Scrolled. Then I started hitting block. Julia. Margaret. Vanessa. One by one, their names disappeared from my reach. And more importantly, I disappeared from theirs. The silence afterward was immediate. Cleansing. I tossed the phone onto the couch and grabbed a beer from the fridge. The cold glass grounded me. I walked back to the fire, dropped another log onto the embers, and sat down on the floor, just listening to the crackle. They didn't get to control the narrative anymore. They didn't get to cast me as the villain in a story they wrote without me. This cabin had become more than a retreat. It was a reset. A line in the snow, drawn firm and clear. I wasn't coming back to the same life I'd left. They could scream into their group chats, reframe their stories however they wanted. Let Julia paint herself as the abandoned mother. Let Margaret play the wounded matriarch. Let Vanessa roll her eyes and pretend none of it was her fault. They could all spin until they got dizzy. I wasn't stepping back into the ring. I stood up, walked to the desk by the window, and pulled out the small leather sketchbook I'd picked up at the lodge gift shop the day before. I wasn't an artist. Not by any stretch. But I needed to put something down, something that would outlast the moment. I sketched the mountains. Jagged, bold lines. Underneath, I wrote a date. The day I boarded that flight. My liberation day. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't perfect. But it was mine. A mark I made. A reminder of the moment I stopped asking to be included and started choosing myself. I flipped the book shut and stared out at the snow again. This quiet, this clarity wasn't a vacation. It was a beginning. And the next time they searched for me in their storm of blame, they'd find only silence. The kind that comes when a man finally decides he's done playing the part they wrote for him. I wasn't lost. I'd never been more found. The following day, the snow had stopped. The sky was a sheet of pale blue, so clear it looked unreal, like someone had painted it overnight just for me. The air outside the cabin was sharp, fresh, biting with that kind of cold that clears your head whether you want it to or not. I stood on the porch in my boots and heavy coat, sipping coffee and watching the steam curl from the mug in my hands. Everything looked clean, untouched. It didn't feel like I was hiding out anymore. It felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. And for a few blissful minutes, it stayed that way. Then my phone buzzed again. Not with texts. Those had stopped since I'd blocked Julia, Margaret, and Vanessa, but with an email. From Julia. Subject line, "Can we talk?" I didn't open it. Didn't need to. It was probably the same cycle, just dressed up in formal punctuation and slightly more polite wording. Something about how I'd overreacted. Something about Noah needing both parents. Something about how she was trying, but I was making it impossible. She could wait. Forever, if necessary. I poured another cup of coffee and sat at the table with my sketchbook, flipping back to the mountain I'd drawn the night before. The date beneath it felt more real now, etched in my memory, not just the paper. I picked up the pencil again and traced the lines darker, stronger. I started shading the edges, adding depth, sharpening the peaks. That sketch had become something else now. An idea, a symbol, maybe a tattoo. Small, simple, but permanent. A reminder that I chose me when they decided I didn't count. Later that morning, I headed back to the slopes. Carl, the same driver who picked me up from the airport, gave me a lazy grin as I climbed into the shuttle. "Back at it," he said. "Can't stop now." I replied, nodding toward my gear. "Good call. Snow's fresh today. You'll love it." The ride up was quiet. The road snaked through snow-covered pine and sloping hills. It felt like I was slipping further and further away from everything that used to drag me down. When we reached the lodge, Mia, my instructor, was already waiting by the ski racks, bundled up in a navy jacket, her breath rising in puffs as she smiled and waved. "You ready for something steeper?" she called. "Let's find out." We hit a more challenging trail this time, the kind that curved and twisted just enough to demand your full attention. And for once, that's exactly what I gave it. No drifting thoughts, no echoes of guilt, just the sound of wind rushing past and the rhythmic crunch of my skis biting into the snow. I didn't fall. I didn't flail. I flew. Each run felt like stripping another layer off. Layer of regret. Layer of shame. Layer of being told I was too quiet, too passive, too soft. The mountain didn't care who I was. It didn't care if I made Julia mad or if Margaret rolled her eyes when I stood my ground. It just let me move. Let me breathe. After a couple of hours, Mia clapped me on the back as we unclipped at the bottom of the slope. "You're getting the hang of it fast," she said. "Guess I needed it more than I thought." I smiled, and this time it felt real. No effort, no mask. Later that afternoon, I wandered into the bar Carl had mentioned on my first day. It was tucked into the back of the lodge, all worn wood and low lighting. A small whiskey tasting was going on. Locals and travelers gathered around a long table covered in bottles with names I'd never heard of. I sat beside a couple in their 60s, Mel and Jonas, from Vermont. Friendly, loud, quick to laugh. "What brings you out here solo?" Mel asked after her third sip. I paused, then shrugged. "Missed a birthday party. Best decision I've ever made." Jonas lifted his glass in a slow, deliberate toast. "To that," he said. "Family can wait." We clinked glasses. The burn of the whiskey followed quickly, warm and sharp, just like the truth. We talked a while longer, sharing stories. They told me about a moose encounter from last winter. I told them about skiing for the first time in years. We didn't talk about the people we left behind, just the lives we were choosing now. When I finally made it back to the cabin, I tossed my coat on the couch, grabbed the sketchbook, and sat by the fire. I snapped a photo of the flames, their light dancing along the stone walls. Then I posted it with one line. "I don't fix family messes anymore. That job's been outsourced to karma." I tossed the phone aside without looking at the responses. I didn't need to see them. Let them talk. Let them whisper. Let them scramble. I was done playing cleanup crew for their chaos. I sipped the last of my whiskey and leaned back, eyes half closed, the fire crackling in front of me, the sketchbook warm on my lap. They could spin their stories however they liked. But me? I was too far gone to hear them, and I wasn't coming back. I woke up on my last day in Jackson Hole to a sunrise so vivid it felt like a warning. The sky had exploded into shades of orange and pink, lights spilling over the mountaintops like fire chasing away the cold. I stood at the cabin window with a mug of coffee in hand, staring out at that horizon, knowing I was different now. The fire had burned low overnight, but I didn't bother relighting it. I didn't need the comfort anymore. The warmth I'd come for wasn't in the logs or the cabin walls. It was in me now, settled deep in the space where hurt used to live. My flight home wasn't until later that afternoon, but I'd already packed. My sweaters were folded neatly, my sketchbook with the mountain and the date tucked safely inside. The bag looked small sitting by the door, but somehow heavier than when I arrived, filled with proof that I'd survived something I couldn't even name when I left. Before I headed out, I strapped on skis one last time and hit the slopes for a solo run. Mia wasn't around, and that was fine. I didn't need a guide. The rhythm was mine now. I moved faster than I had all week, carving through the powder, wind biting at my cheeks. It wasn't just adrenaline. It was release. It was defiance. It was every "you're overreacting" and every "don't make this about you" left behind in the snow. At the bottom of the hill, I stopped, chest heaving, heart pounding. Not from exhaustion, but from clarity. I'd earned this peace. Back at the cabin, I peeled off the gear, changed, and sat down for one final moment by the fire pit, watching the last few embers glow. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, the screen lighting up with a new notification. Another email. Julia again. I didn't even open it. Whatever she wanted, whether it was closure, apology, another twisted justification, I didn't owe it to her. Not after everything. Not after they pushed me out and called it a misunderstanding. Not after they staged a party around my absence and expected me to clean up the fallout. Instead, I snapped a photo through the cabin window, the snow-covered trees, the sky now pale blue, the footprints from my earlier walks still fresh in the snow. And I posted it with one final message. Turns out I didn't miss much. I gained everything. I shut the phone off after that. Not airplane mode, completely off. No more buzzing. No more voices clawing at the peace I fought like hell to find. The shuttle driver, Carl, pulled up right on time. He smiled through the windshield as I stepped outside and tossed my bag into the back. Heading home, he asked. Eventually, I replied, settling into the front seat. You look different, he said, glancing sideways as he pulled onto the road. Lighter. Feels that way, I said quietly. We didn't talk much after that. The winding roads passed by in silence, the trees flashing like memories I didn't need to carry anymore. The mountains faded behind us, shrinking but still standing tall in my rearview mind. At the airport, I checked in without hassle. My flight was on time. The boarding gate was calm. For once, I wasn't anxious about where I was headed. I boarded the plane with the sketchbook in my hands. I didn't open it, just held it. Tight, quiet, meaningful. A souvenir, sure, but also a vow. When we landed, it was evening. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, and my town looked exactly as I left it. Gray, routine, small. But I wasn't the same. The house was just as empty. The lights were still off. But instead of feeling hollow, it felt like a blank canvas. Like I could start over. The Lego tower Noah had built still sat on the coffee table. I stared at it for a long time. Not with sadness. Not with regret. But with determination. He was still mine. And I'd still be his father, just not on their terms. I didn't need Julia's permission to love him. I didn't need Margaret's approval to belong. I didn't need Vanessa's opinion on what kind of man I should be. I cracked open a beer, stepped out into the backyard, and looked up at the stars. Not as bright as Jackson Hole, but still beautiful in their own quiet way. I raised the bottle toward the sky. To peace, I whispered. The first sip was cold and sharp, and it felt like the final page of a chapter long overdue. I'd come back to the same place, but I wasn't the same man. And whatever came next, emails, excuses, guilt-laced invitations, I'd face it with a clarity no one could take from me now. No more begging for a place at the table. No more asking to be included. No more circling their chaos, hoping for crumbs of decency. I had snow in my lungs, fire in my chest, and a mountain etched in my soul. And I was done apologizing for needing more. Looking back, If there's one thing this whole ordeal taught me, it's that silence can be louder than any argument. Sometimes, walking away isn't weakness. It's the strongest stand you can take. For years, I thought being steady meant being agreeable, that keeping the peace meant sacrificing my place. But peace bought with your dignity isn't peace at all. I learned that you don't have to keep proving your worth to people who refuse to see it. Especially for us, the older we get, the more we realize time is a currency, and we shouldn't spend it where it's not valued. Family doesn't just mean blood. It means respect, presence, and mutual effort. If they can't offer that, then maybe it's okay to stop showing up. It's not about holding grudges. It's about protecting your peace. If I could tell anyone my age one thing, it's this. It's never too late to draw a boundary, to choose yourself, and to find peace somewhere new. Even if it's thousands of miles away, in a quiet cabin where the only thing that matters is the sound of your own breath, finally steady. Don't wait for others to hand you permission to matter. You already do.